Hi everybody and welcome to the video. I'll be showing you how to make a game ready asset in Blender and Marmoset Toolbag 4. Hello and welcome back everybody to this tutorial series. And next in this video we're going to be using Marmoset Toolbag version 4. A quick overview before I do that. In the top left we've got our outliner essentially. On the right hand side, the top right, we've got materials. We can see there we have a default material already created for us. I don't think we'll be using that though. Beneath the outliner effectively, if you click on any of these existing items, such as the main camera, you now have the camera options just there. If you click on sky, likewise you have the options for that there, including the HDRI, the default one, which you can change through the library like so. So yeah, just pick an HDRI or load your own one. So let's go back to our scene. And the first thing we're going to do is to load our FBX file. And to do that, we need to create a bake project. So you see these little icons here. If we click this little bread icon, that creates a bake project. You can rename that if you prefer, to double click it and rename that to whatever you like. We also have a bake group folder, and inside that we have high and low, neither of which are populated with any objects because we haven't actually imported our FBX file. So I'm going to click on the bake project icon there. All of our options for the bake just here beneath that. Let's make that a little bit bigger. So before we import our FBX file, we're going to change a few things here first. First one is the output location, and also, the location will be where you've saved your Marmoset Toolbag file. Okay, but you can see there we've got it currently set to PSD file, and there's a default name of bake, which we don't want. So I'm going to click this little icon here, and firstly I'm going to change this to PNG, not PSD, and it's my previous test there. So I'm going to borrow the same name, and let's delete everything after 1 and enter the number 2. So it's the second version of that. So don't add anything else after that. That's fine as it is, and hit save. And you can see there you've got the number 2 and then .png. The samples I'm going to increase to 16. That'll give it a nicer rendition on the images that it exports. Now we do have a padding size there of 8 pixels. You could change that to custom. In fact, I might just do that. Let's put 16 and see how that goes. If you notice any problems, you can always rebake it after that. So further down, we've got maps. So at the moment, we only have normals selected, but I'm going to select all of these like that. And you can click configure and add additional maps if you so choose. There will be one more that I'm going to add actually, and that's the position. So I'm going to click that. You can see it's added it down here and it's already checked. Marmoset Toolbag will generate all of your default maps, your standard maps from Metalness workflow. The next stage is really load the FBX file. So you see a little load button just there under quick loader. So let's click that and navigate to your FBX file. There it is, and click open. So you can see here, if everything worked out okay, you should be able to see your low polygon version object in the viewport. All right. Now currently that's set to the main camera, which is the one we have there. But you can change that under this drop-down menu. So I like to change it to perspective. Why not? So there's our perspective camera, just like we would do in Blender. Now what's interesting is, if you remember, we saved 3 high poly meshes and 3 low poly meshes, all individual objects from Blender into one FBX file. And what I like about Marmoset Toolbag is it recognized that it has 3 objects that are high and 3 that are low. And the way that Marmoset Toolbag works, it needs a separate folder for each of those objects. And within each of those objects, you have your high and your low. So there's our blade, our handle, and our handle parts. So it's done that all for us, which is really good. So I'm just going to collapse these again. That really need. I'll leave the top one open just so we can see it. So let's click back onto our Bake Project 1, name there. And the next part is this area here, we have several icons. Now, I've never actually clicked this one. This is more, apparently that creates a new bake group, but I'm not going to do that. This is H for high, L for low, and P for preview. Now, assuming everything is okay and everything's been configured correctly, ideally, hopefully we can click this P button and that will give us a preview of what it would look like once the high detail is baked onto the low detail. So let's do that by clicking P. Now take a second the first time it does this, and there it goes, and 3, 2, 1, done. That's very quick. Now this is the low poly version, not the high poly version. But how do we know that? Because it looks like the high poly version, right? Obviously you can see the jaggies here alongside the, you can see the polygons basically. So that's a clue right there. But if you want to be absolutely sure, you can go up to the top in the viewport here in the top left. You can select wireframe. And that will show you, obviously, the wireframe for the object. Let's go back to full quality. So with our preview done, and I think I'm happy with that. I can't see any obvious glitches. I mean, there's a little bit of, oops. Yeah, there's a bit of a seam there. I don't know if I noticed that before on my test, but let's just go with that. It could be that the padding size is not quite right. I'm not too sure. Let's change that to 8 actually. Let's do a little test. So I'm going to click bake again. Nothing seems to have changed so far. Let's zoom in a little bit. And it's pretty much the same thing. So let's just go with that. I think that's going to be fine. You probably won't notice that once it's textured anyway. So again, what we're looking at here is the low poly version of the object. And again, you can see that through the wireframe there. So once we've done that, we're happy with our bake. Everything's good there. We need to start working on the textures themselves. So to do that, we need to click on this little icon here to create a new texture project. It looks like a little painting palette, easel. Is it not an easel? That's the one you paint the canvas goes on. Anyway, the paint palette, let's click that. And you can see we have a texture project 1. Again, double click that, rename it if you want. So I'm going to select that. Let's have a look at our paint, our texture project settings, I should say. At the top here, you've got your project settings. Resolution is set to 4K by default. Click here to resize that to anything you like. Viewport resolution is 1:1. If you have a slower machine, perhaps, or it's a bit laggy, turn that down to half the resolution, if that works for you. For the preview and the viewport as well, you've got 4 there. But anyway, the UV padding is set to 16, and I think our bake was set to 8. Yeah, okay. So let's change that to 8 as well, just for the sake of making sure we're not going crazy there. Probably 16 is fine anyway, as we saw earlier. Right, moving on. Linked materials, I'll come back to that in a second. But the rest of it here, you have output maps, you've got export settings, and the resolution, the size of the maps, and the project maps that you're going to actually be generating for this texture project, and input maps. Now, the input maps, you can see there are named curvature, normal, normal object, material ID, and ambient occlusion. We have these already generated for us. We need to add our input maps. Okay. Before we do that, look over to the right-hand side, the top right-hand corner, and these are the materials that we assigned in Blender. So you can see we've got blade, handle parts. The default material, of course, is there still, and we have one called hand blade, which is the master one, really. So, because that's what the FBX was called, right? It's called handblade.fbx. So with that one selected, I'm going to click and drag it and drop it into linked materials. And that tells Marmoset Toolbag, this is the material that I want to be manipulating throughout this texturing project. So once we've done that, The input maps have been updated, as have the output maps automatically. But we're not quite done yet, because you'll notice some of these are actually empty. You've got normals, and that's great. Ambient occlusion, that's great. And these are the files that it's generated for us. So ignoring all the files there, here are the ones that we've just generated. Number 2. So we do have the normal object, position, curve, and mat ID, material ID. So what we're going to do is apply these, or assign them to these slots just here on the input maps. To do that, click on one of these empty icons. And this one is the curvature map. So let's find test 2, curvature, curve, there it is, and click open. And let's work our way through each of these. The normal object is this one here. Material ID is this one here. If you remember, we set all of these colors up in Blender on their materials. Great. Now that that's done, let's go to the next part down here. And before I do that, this part here, the project maps, you can choose to change the workflow. So we have metalness by default, or you can change it to specular if you so wish. I'm going to leave it at metalness. Right, further down, output maps. Now we've already got some populated already, which is lovely. Marmoset's done some of the work for us. And in fact, all of the maps are there. However, the last one is a mixed map. And this is fine if you want to leave it like that. You're more than welcome to. But I like to have individual maps that I can work with. So the albedo is fine, the normal is fine, and the mixed map, for now, let's just leave that. But what we can do is add new at the bottom here as an option. Click that. It will add a new map. And I'm going to first of all rename the suffix to AO for ambient occlusion. Next, I want to change the type from RGB to grayscale. And also change the file format to PNG. Let's do that for all of these. And finally, we can select the type of map that we're actually generating here, and that's ambient occlusion. Okay, you can see there, it's now recognized that map for us, the one that we generated, just there. So it's a very clever system, Marmoset Toolbag. It knows what's what and where to put them, which is really cool. Right, so ambient occlusion is done. Roughness, let's click add new and rename that to roughness. Once again, we don't need RGB on this one. It's not a color information file. It's grayscale. So let's change it to grayscale. Change it back to PNG and select roughness for our map type there. And finally, metalness. Let's rename that to metalness. And once again, likewise, it's an RGB. It's not an RGB, it's a grayscale image. So we select grayscale, PNG, and metalness as the file type. Now these look empty because they are empty. We haven't actually generated those yet. Okay, so that looks all good. You can keep the mixed map if you prefer. I might just delete that. It's gone. There we go. I actually forgot something. The output, export settings, but we can do that later. Okay, let's start texturing. And to do that, at the top here, in the top left, you'll notice we have some tabs. The left one is classic. The one we were just on is setup, because we're setting up our project. Next one is texture, render, and animate. Yep, you can animate within Marmoset Toolbag, and also set up new cameras, do all sorts of clever things, and lights, and all sorts. You even have 3D models you can actually append or add that come with Marmoset Toolbag in the library. But getting ahead of ourselves there. So let's go back to texture. And now you'll notice the interface has changed to this layout. Here's our viewport, perspective viewport, with our low polygon object and our high detail maps shown on the object. Here we have a canvas. This would be the currently selected map that you're working on. So you see here you'll be able to see the UVs of your texture map. Here we have layer settings, which is currently empty. And on the right hand side, you've got two tabs now. We've got materials, as we saw earlier, the hand blade is there. And over here, we've got layers. If you click here, you can see we have roughness, metalness, normal, bump, ambient occlusion, and of course the albedo. So everything is there that we need. This works similar to Photoshop in that you've got also have these blending modes that you can change there, as well as additional options here, which we'll be using throughout this tutorial. So let's select our material, which is that one, of course. We've got the albedo selected, and we have no layers, nothing at all assigned to our material. At the bottom here, you've got the library window, which is where you're going to find most of your, if not all of your materials that you're going to be working with in Marmoset Toolbag, just like you would in Substance Painter. So if I make this a little bit smaller. So on the left here, you can see we have our library categories. There are many assets here, and I certainly won't go through them all today, if at all, ever. But here you have objects that I mentioned earlier. You can add objects to your scene. You've got a lights category and you've got a mesh category. So that one shows you all of them. Under brushes, we have nuts and bolts and organic. If you click the main category, it shows you everything, as you can see there. And scenes, I haven't used this yet, but you have some scenes there you can play around with. Skies, HDRI files, and these are also categorized, much like you'd find on polyhaven.com. We've got smart masks, which are great. And we've got smart materials. And we have, let's open that up actually. So you can see there, smart materials, we've got a ton there. So for example, under metallic or metals, you have all of these lovely maps that you can play around with. And finally, we have textures. We're going to be using these as well quite frequently. So you've got your brushes. Of course, you can add your own grunge maps. There's many here. Everything from rust, dust, scratches, fingerprints, patterns. And we have stencils. So here you have icons, shapes, trims, and obviously you can add your own, as I said, if you want to do that. And also, you have a search feature here. So you can type in there, for example, rust, and it's not showing anything because I'm not in the right category. For example, if I click on textures, you do have some results in here that will say rust at some point. If I click on stone, we have one actually, which is odd. Plaster, nothing. So if you're not in the right folder, this is not a global search. It's a unique search within that highlighted category. So I'm going to click back onto, where is it? Should we do smart materials? I just got on materials actually. So I'm going to use materials instead. Let's get rid of our search. Let's assign a material to our object here. And in our stack, of course, we have nothing there. It's empty. Now I'm going to head over to our library. Under materials, I'm going to select metal. And in here, I can choose obviously any material that I like. I'm going to go with nickel poked. There it is. So I can select this and immediately, once I've started dragging it, click and dragging it, our viewport changes to the the material ID colors that we set in Blender. So we can isolate where this material is going to be applied by color. So if I want it just on the blade, I can release it on the red area. If I want it on the handle, I can release it just on the blue area. I believe you can also do that in the canvas part here, but I'm not going to do that. I'm going to drag it directly into our material layers like that. And because we haven't specified where that's going to be applied, it has applied it to the whole object. So let's create this new layer group icon just there in the top right. And now we have a group, and I'm going to call that blade. And of course, our nickel poked is inside that. Now, if you click on nickel poked, on this window here, layer settings, this gives you exactly that, the layer settings. And within here, you can see this metallic material is affecting the albedo, the roughness, metalness, normal, bump, and AO. If you wish to disable some of these or all of those, obviously there's no point in disabling all of them. But for example, if you don't want it to affect the roughness, you simply click roughness, and that's now been disabled. You still have the default roughness on there from somewhere anyway. But if we click on the roughness again now, that's now enabled, and we have our metal as it should be. So beneath that, you've got your projection type. By default, it's set to triplanar, which is great, which is fine. That's what we want. You've got offsets, you've got tiling, rotation, edge fade, normal map influence, and transform. I rarely play around with these too much for these kind of things, really. It depends on the material. More importantly, underneath that, you've got all of your influences on this object from this material. So that includes all of these here at the top there, all 6 of these. So you can see there we have the albedo, roughness, metalness, and so on. And the cool thing about these are you have these sliders where you can change, for example, if you think you want that to be more metallic looking or more rough or smoother, I should say. You can turn down the roughness and get a mirror finish like so. All right. So obviously that's a bit crazy. You can undo that. Oops, there we go, undo. It's gone back to 0.275. You can also change the contrast and things like that. You can see there, that gives it a bit more of a grungy look. So less parts are now rough, as they say. And what I really like about this viewport operation that comes with Marmoset is if you click on full quality and you go to texture project, you can select just the roughness map there, and it will show you what that roughness map looks like on your model. So as you're making changes down here, like this, you can see the effect in real time, which is really cool. Let's put that back to 1, the default, and leave that as default as well, just for the sake of this demonstration. Okay, so metalness, the same thing. You can go in and change that in the viewport and then make some changes. You can change the strength of the normal map and things like that. And in fact, I feel like the normal map is a little bit too strong. You can see this looks more like a very old heavy metal rather than a blade metal, perhaps. I don't know. So I'm going to turn that down just a touch. So let's zoom in a bit here. And there's our normal map. And let's drive that down a little bit. Let's go with 0.5. That's what we had. We had 1. Let's put it to 0.5. We also have the bump map here. That's 0.5 by default. If we increase that to 1, I don't really see much of a difference. Let's try and get another angle there. Let's bring it down to 0. I don't really see much of a difference. Let's leave that at 0.5 as well. In fact, if you don't notice the difference, you can just turn off bump in the top there, and that will show you the difference as you're disabling and enabling that. Right, let's go with that anyway. That's fine. But let's address this issue of applying this just to the blade. And to do that, we can use the material ID map that was generated. So we're going to use that and tell the group to basically use one of those material IDs. So with the group selected, I'm going to right click on that and add a mask, and I'm going to select black. And because a black mask hides everything, our nickel looks as though it's disappeared off our model, which is what we'd expect. If the mask was white, it would be the same everywhere, visibly everywhere. So we've got the paint layer now, which is a mask. So you could actually go in and paint on this. You have some painting options at the top here, and you have all your brushes and settings here. But I'm not going to go into that in this video. Let's go back to our paint layer just there. It's this one here, I believe. Right, yes, it is. So select the paint layer. Click on this one that says add a new input processor layer. It looks like a miniature CPU icon. Click on that and select, in fact, we can do that by right clicking anyway, color selection. And with that done, again, nothing's changed in the viewport because we haven't actually selected a material ID. You can see there in the layer settings, we've got material ID selected. And what we want to do now is click new, and we have our material ID in the viewport. Just click on one of these now, actually. You don't even have to click the eyedropper. So I'm going to click on the red one. And now that's created the mask identified by the material ID. And it's assigned it just to the blade, which is great. So that's a good way of keeping things pretty tidy. Now you notice here when I click on the folder, this doesn't disappear because they're not technically inside the folder, they're influencing the folder, just like clipping masks do in Photoshop. So to close them, you can just click this little arrow on the right hand side. It says there, expand or collapse this layer's children. So like that. If I want to see the layer contents, the group contents, click the folder and there's our metallic material. Let's do the remainder of our objects now, like we did with this one. So let's create a new group, not within there. Can I deselect that? Yeah, let's create a new group and let's call that handle. And in this group, I'm going to select on the material, in the material library, I'm going to select wood as that category. And let's select one that we like from here. I'm going to go with the oak weathered aged material. So I'm going to drag that into our handle just there. Now I could just drag it directly onto the blue. So why don't I just do that to show you how that works. You can see that's now created a mask as well for us. Let's drag that onto our handle group. It didn't quite, let's drag that like this. There we go. Now you can see the mask is actually added to the oak weathered aged material we just added. If you contrast that to the nickel one, the blade, the mask is added to the group, not the material layer within the group. So this way is a much neater way, I believe. So I'm going to go with that for this one as well. So with this selected, I'm just going to delete the mask. Make sure you delete both of these. So we just have the oak weathered again left in that group. And like before, I'm going to right click on the handle group this time, add mask and make it black. And of course the wood material is now going to disappear like it did for our blade material. Okay. So with that done, we're going to add the material ID to that group. So I click on this icon once again, select color selection, add new, and click on the blue. And there we have the wood material added to our handle. Let's deselect both of these by holding down Control. If you have one selected like that, hold down Control to deselect it. I wonder if I can click outside. Doesn't seem to. No. So hit down Control. Let's create a new group and call this Handleparts. Just call it one word like that, whatever you like. And once again, I'm going to right click on that. But before I do that, let's add a metallic material to that as well, just so we can see that. And for this one, let's do something really nice, like a color that complements the wood, maybe brass or something like that. So here we have I've got the brass one downloaded, brass brushed, brass dirty, bronze, we've got some there, bronze worn. I quite like the bronze worn, I've tried that before. So let's drag this one and drop it into our group Handleparts. And of course that's going to apply to everything because we don't have a mask applied to the group. So but we can look at the material for now and see if we like that. I think that looks pretty good. We can play around with those settings afterwards. This is just setting up all the groups we need and adding a basic material to start off with. So let's right click on this folder, add mask, paint mask black. That will hide the bronze. And now with the paint layer selected, let's click on the input processor one, whatever it's called, input something, and then color selection, add new, and click on the green part there. So there you go. Now we have 3 materials added to each part of our model. So in the next section of the video, we'll start actually, let's close that. We'll go through and work on each of these. In fact, I don't need to see those two. Let's just hide them. We're going to start adding more layers to this nickel poked or the blade group, so we can get a bit more variation and style to our blade there. So what I've got here, I've set up a another layer of whatever this is. It's essentially a fill layer. It's not actually a material, the green part or the aqua part, or cyan, whatever that color that is. But it's a good principle in terms of how to add multiple layers and then have them filtered to stack them and have this kind of effect. As many layers as you like, of course. So let's just run through that and see how we did that. So we'll add another layer, essentially the same as I've just done there. So what I first did is, if I just click on here first and turn off this particular layer, what I'll do first is add a fill layer. So let's just click on this folder, right click, add a layer. Let's add a fill layer. And I'm going to drag it into the folder actually because it didn't go in there. So there's our fill layer. You can see it's white. And if I select the fill layer, with that selected, you can see here in the layer settings, there's a white swatch. So if we click this and we give it a different color, you can see there that's updating in our viewport. And the reason I'm getting this color picker essentially is because I clicked this earlier. So maybe it does that by default. I don't remember. Never tried to click in there before. So you could just click here, for example, and select that color as like that. Right, let's make this a bit more obvious what it is. Let's make it this orangey kind of color. Something like that. Make it a bit stronger. Let's go with that. Oh, I clicked over there by mistake. Click OK. So there's our yellow fill layer, which is covering the whole blade, of course. So on top of that, I'm going to right click on that and add a mask and fill mask black. And that will, of course, hide the whole yellow color, right? So let's right click on the fill layer we just created and add layer, processors, scratch. And you can see we're getting back some of that yellow color now. Okay. So with that selected, we've got our scratch layer properties here. Now, before I continue, I want to collapse that one. So I'm going to have a look and see what our scratch layer here is doing. So if we select this one, you can see that I've added a couple of maps, grunge maps, and that's pretty much it really. And this one is just a standard fill layer that we added, which is that one essentially. So we've got the scratch settings, and I've changed some of these to get that effect that you can see here. Okay, so I won't memorize all of these, of course, but if I enable the yellow one now and turn off the cyan one, let's head over back to our scratch layer there. And of course, you can also do invert, and it doesn't seem to do anything right there. You can invert it at the top. Again, nothing's really happening. That's because I'm clicking the wrong one. So easy to get confused in this. Right, scratch layer. There we go. So we can click that and invert it completely, or click that one and that'll do the same thing. Okay, so you can see there it's pretty much everywhere, which is fair enough. So now that we've done that, we don't want this so uniform, so we can head over to our textures, grunge maps, and we can select dust surface, which is this one here, and I can drag that and drop it onto the grunge mask just there. And let's click back onto the one that I did earlier. So it's not inverted, and we've got the grunge map there, dust surface, and I've also added a fingerprint heavy under the scratch material itself, and that's the one that really makes a difference. So let me turn off the cyan one, turn on the orange one, and click on our scratch layer, and I'll find the fingerprint heavy, which is just there, and I drag and drop that onto the scratch map just there. You can see that's much more visible now, as you can see on our canvas just in there. So the next part is really just playing around with the parameters for our scratch map, like so. You can change the scale, of course, something like that. Obviously you can rotate it, perhaps give it more of a directional look and feel. Not that you can really tell. So there's that. And if I just zoom in a bit here and have a look at the edges and crevices and that kind of thing. If we do the edge thickness, you can see that highlights the edges in that fashion, which we don't really want, so I'm just going to keep that. I'm going to undo that and leave it at 0. Okay, make sure we save our work. And let's head over back to our grunge map up here. And let's have a look and see what happens if we turn up the grunge intensity. So you can see there it's having a nice effect and actually taken away from all of these highlights just there, which I quite like actually. So I think we'll probably go with that, turn the intensity up of our grunge map. We can also change the contrast, of course, and that would make it look a bit more. You can see there, if I zoom in, turn this back down, see some marks there, which are quite nice actually, kind of chipping away. And of course you can change the grunge scale to suit your look and feel. Okay, and of course the rotation, as always. That seems to only affect really the scratchy, not the scratchy, the crevices and the recesses of the object. It's more like an edge wear almost, but not quite. So again, if I turn this down, so it's really having the most obvious effect along the edges there. So you could turn that up quite a way there. So that's quite a nice result. Now if we go back to our fill layer and click on the orange one there, this is affecting the albedo and right through to the ambient occlusion maps. So if you wanted to have a bit more depth on this, or maybe this is some sort of paint or something, or some sort of material that's come into contact with our weapon here, now we could just turn down or increase the roughness. So if you turn the roughness up, you can see that it's not as reflective and it looks a bit more like a matte material, right? A bit more like paint, I guess. So you may want to tweak with that, play around with that. That's quite nice. As well as the contrast of that. It doesn't really make a difference in this case, I think. Interestingly, if we go down to bump, I'll zoom in here a little bit. This at the moment just seems to sit on the surface. But if we increase the bump value from 0.5, i.e. mid-grey, if we increase it to the right, you can see there, it's actually having some depth to that now. That could be something that you're after. Go the other way, of course, it goes into the metal. As you can see there, it's eating away into the metal there. Where's my bump? There it is. So you could go that way, or you can go that way. But I think in this case, I'm just going to reset it back to 0.5. So I think that's quite a nice, subtle way of doing that. Now that is quite strong, of course. Let's click back on the on our scratch layer just there, and perhaps we can turn down the contrast a touch, maybe the intensity, and at this point maybe turn up the contrast a touch. I think you've got the idea. It depends how strong you want this really. Maybe lower the scale down a little bit so it looks, the strokes are much broader essentially and not so small, right? So just rotate our HDRI. I think that was looking pretty good. So if we turn back on now our cyan, let's bring our HDRI somewhere there. If we turn on our cyan layer, we've now got a mix of the two. And in fact, that's actually on the edge there as well, which looks a bit weird, but hey ho. So there you go. You can start adding as many layers as you like. Now the orange one of the cyan can literally be any other material. So it could be metallic, it could be paint, plaster, stone, and you can use this process for adding your masks. So just going back to our materials, I'm going to actually disable the orange one that we just made and I demonstrated. I'm going to go back to the cyan one. I think I'm going to keep the cyan because I quite like that color. However, I'm not really happy with this edge looking so, well, it's too prominent, I think, and it doesn't really make sense. So let's click on this scratch layer there and have a look at our settings there. So what I'm going to do is find out how we can get rid of that a little bit. So let's do edge intensity first. Now obviously that makes it stronger, so let's go the other way. And if we have a look at our canvas there with our UVs, you can see we no longer see those edges as prominently as we did before. So there's before and there's after. So let's go for something down there. Let's minimize this window again. There it is. And let's have a look and see if there's anything else that we may want to get rid of or change. I do quite like that. Perhaps that's a little bit strong, but I love that effect. I think that's really nice. So you can always turn down the contrast of the grunge, actually. Doesn't seem to make much of a difference, the grunge. Let's zoom in on this and see if you can spot anything in here. I suspect no, because this is actually going to be, if we turn this back up to 4 actually, and change the grunge intensity, you can see how the grunge is affecting the highlights. So the grunge area is very much for the scratch zones, i.e. the edge wear effectively, and the scratch sub area here in layer settings is actually for the whole shape of the model, the whole coverage. So maybe we can find a nice compromise here between the two. Let's have a look at our front part again. So yeah, you can see now we actually have a little bit here and there, which is better than it was. Still not happy the way it looks there, so perhaps we can turn down the scratch intensity a touch. And if we do the grunge intensity, that would break it up like that. And in fact, I think I may just bring this down. Oops, bring that up, I mean. I want to see some of this painty thing on there like that. I think that's fine. Let's go with that. Let's make sure we save. And next we'll handle the handle. How's that for a cool joke, eh? Let's collapse our blade group because we've finished with that for now. We can actually turn that off if we wanted to. And let's click on our handle group here. Open the group up and you can see we've got oak, weathered, aged. Let's go back to what we had before. Let's add a fill layer. I'm just going to click this one here. And that will add a fill layer just there. So we've got that there. Here's our swatch. Let's make this a color that we can see for now. And we'll come back and change this. Let's make this oversaturated and a bit bright. Let's keep it as red for now, and we'll come back to this later on. Add a mask and fill black. So now it's hidden. Okay, the red one's hidden, you can't see it. So on this one now we can right click, and this time let's try curvature. Okay, that's better. It's because now it's not just sitting on the ground anymore. So that's obviously following the curvature of the object, and of course we have these crevices here from the wood grain that we sculpted. So that's a nice way of adding some perhaps dust or something into those crevices just there. Now we do have, if I close this and just turn that off for a moment, there is a material here. I believe it might be under, let's just search in materials, search for dust. Perhaps we can add some sort of detail inside the handle areas. So if we just go for a straightforward either ash or, I'm going to go with this one because it's actually quite visible. It's easy to see. Let's drop that in there. Let's just close our blade for a second. And if we do the same as before now, if we right click on this and add a layer mask, fill mask, black, so now it's hidden. And we can right click on this fill layer mask, add a processor, and call that curvature. And now you can see that's actually kind of collecting inside these crevices and such. So let's play around with some of these settings here. And let's turn up the contrast. So we're kind of isolating it within those crevices now. So that's pretty cool. Let's bring this down a little bit. And let's try and make this a little bit less uniform. So let's have a look at our options here. Edge thickness. Okay, that's not too bad. That kind of breaks it up a little bit. It's almost like some micro crevices. Coming up with these weird words today. Cavity intensity. That's going to make it stronger, obviously. So we can turn that down a touch if we need to. Cavity thickness. Oops. As you would expect, that just makes it thicker. I'm going to put that back to 0. Sharpen will do exactly what it says on the tin. It will make it softer or sharper. Perhaps we should go a little bit softer on this. Something like that. Not really sure about these secondary lines there. Not too happy with those. And that was the edge thickness, wasn't it? So we can turn that down a touch, like that. And turn the contrast down perhaps. Okay, let's go with that. That looks pretty good. So that's the first 2 layers we have there. Let's just collapse this back into one layer. And there's our other one, which I'm not going to use. Let's delete that one. Like that. Let's make sure we save. Let's, come on. There we go. So now let's add some kind of wear and tear in terms of, or staining as it were. So obviously with this being the grip, it's going to get very dirty. It's going to have all sorts of things going on there. So let's find a material that will give us that kind of effect. Now we could start with a color again, but in this instance I don't think I will do that. And by the way, if we click on that dust layer there, we could actually change the color of that dust here as well. So you could make it more, more yellowy or whatever color you like. You could darken it down, something like this. That's not too bad. Gives it a nice look and feel. Should we keep that? Maybe. Turn up the contrast. That's the albedo. It's not really going to do anything if we do that. We don't really have much of a any roughness going on this really. You can see it's very matte. And I understand that because it is actually, you can see as I rotate the HDRI, we're not really getting any highlights. So maybe we need to see some highlights just to emphasize the shape a bit more. Although strictly speaking, this is using oak weathered, aged. So that's going to be very matte and very dry. However, let's click on that. Let's scroll down here to our roughness. You can see there it's very high at 0.832. Let's bring this down until we start to see. I'm just going to right click and move our HDRI somewhere over there. You can see the effect there in the backlight, as it were. So now we can start to see a bit more of the highlights and the grooves. We can turn that down a little bit more. Let's go with that. Yeah, I think that's looking a bit nicer. It's giving it a bit more life, I think. It's quite good. And of course, as always, you can go back here and change the color of that as well. So that's quite nice. I'm just going to cancel that and leave that its default color, essentially. Okay, so let's go back to adding a layer of weathering and staining, that kind of thing. So let's get rid of the dust search filter there. Now you could really go crazy with this stuff here. You've got algae or algae, I don't know how you pronounce that. Something called Adobe. I'm not sure what that is. It's not the company, presumably. Let's have a look under. We've got some dirt there. Maybe we can use one of these. Now, I like this one, dust smudges. That might be quite a good one to use, actually. Let's try that. Let's put that underneath. Let's put it on top for now. So there it is. That's what it looks like. So you can see it's very matte, which is actually pretty good. Almost looks like it's been burnt in some way. So I quite like that. Let's right click and add a layer mask. So fill mask black again. And that's gone, obviously. Right click on that again. Add layer, processors, scratch again. Okay. So you can see there, we're going to add some maps into this again now. Let's head over to our grunge maps again. And let's see what we have. Let's get that fingerprint one again, because I quite like that. I think that's quite appropriate in this case. So fingerprint heavy. We've got medium. Which one? Let's go with heavy. And that goes into the, I think that was the scratch version there. It immediately made a difference. You can see there in the canvas there. So on this one, oops, I keep clicking that. If we just turn up the contrast, yeah, you can see the effect there. And turn up the intensity. Now we can really start to see that effect on the handle. And that's a little bit too much, granted. Not to worry, we'll continue working on that. So for example, let's turn that down a smidge. And the contrast down a little bit. You could turn this down and see what happens if we turn this up. Obviously it would get a lot softer, as it were. So let's go with something like that. Let's change the scale. Make that, I could make it larger. Like this, go smaller. Like this, and just be more generic, which is quite nice actually. I quite like that. So if we turn this up now, we can isolate that a little bit more. Obviously rotate that. Oops. Rotate that until we find something that we like. Perhaps something there, because that looks as though it's got hit from the front or something. In fact, when I think about it, the other day I was thinking about this, and when I modelled this, ideally, it's not a sword, I get it, but maybe it could have had some sort of guard here at the front, just something small to protect the hand and the fingers at the front there. But that's not really what, it's not, like I say, it's not really a sword, so it doesn't really need one, but maybe it would make a nice bit of detail. And I might come back and revisit this actually and do that at some point. Anyway, I digress. Let's carry on with this scratch layer, and let's add a map now to the grunge area, the grunge map section. And that's going to affect, I guess, other parts of this. So let's try something we haven't perhaps tried before. Let's see what the effect is. I'm not really liking any of those. Got some crinkles there. Dense, cloudy. Should we try that? Let's give that a shot. Oops, I keep clicking that. I've got to stop doing that. Now, has that made any difference? If we turn this up, yeah, you can see there again, it's the crevices that it's really affecting there. So we could turn that. If we turn that up again, and then we can do that. I'm looking at the sword here, but I really shouldn't be looking at that. I should be looking over here, which is the actual handle UVs. So if I do that, you can see there the effect it's having on the grooves there. Let's have a look around and see how that's looking. So I'll go back to the oak, weathered, aged, and just turn the roughness down a touch again. So I really want to see some of that. Those highlights on the wood. If you think about it, this would be a lot smoother actually if it was a handle. So I think perhaps we can turn down the bump as well. You can see there it's 502. Maybe I did that, it probably did, but if you turn this down there, sorry, put it at 0. So it is 502 at the default. So it's slightly beyond the mid-grey, but that's okay. I think essentially the normal is the one that's causing obviously all of these kind of crevices and things. So if we turn down the normal, let's get a good angle. There we go. So let's go back to the normal, turn this down. You can see there, you can turn that right up, which is crazy. You can see there in the preview, it's gone a bit mental there. So if this were a really wooden handle, this would be worn down over time to a much smoother kind of wood, right? So let's turn this down. How does that look? Let's maybe rotate our HDRI. Yeah, you can see there, that's looking a lot nicer. Perhaps still a little bit too rough. I think I want to go with that. Perhaps too soft. Let's put it up to a little bit. I'm going to exaggerate it a touch because it is, you know, arguably a game asset. So let's make that a little bit more obvious to our players that this is actually wood. I think we've solved the illusion. Let's go back to our scratch up here with the dust smudges in the dust. Well, the dust smudges, I should say. So let's click on that again and go back to our dust layer properties. Let's see if we can tweak anything here to make this pop a little bit more. Now we could actually select the original dust map there, and there is no color value here that I can see for the albedo, because that's actually using this texture map. Okay, which makes sense because it is actually a grunge map, so it does make sense. Let's turn our dust back on as well. See the full effect. Yeah, I'm really pleased with that. So anyway, getting back to this. What can we do here to make this perhaps pop a little bit more? How about the scale? I think we've done that already, but we've got the scratch scale, intensity, thickness, the edge. I think that was fine as it was. Actually, let's have a look at that a bit better there. So just keeping an eye on this one now. As you can see, that's a lot more, it has a lot more coverage with the edge intensity set down to a low value, but perhaps we want it to be a bit higher so we can see more of the wood through that. Let's have a look around. Yeah, I think I actually prefer that. Looks like it's been worn off a bit nicer. Okay, it's not too bad. Perhaps that is a little bit too shiny. I might tweak that one more time. Sorry, guys. Let's go back to roughness on the oak weathered aged. Turn that up a smidge. Let's go with 0.6, shall we? Let's just compromise with that one there. Okay, let's go back to this. So just to recap on the handle, we've got our oak weathered aged. We've added a dust layer, which is quite subtle. And on top of that, we've added dust smudges, just to give it a bit more of a used look and feel. So I'm happy with that. I'm going to save that there. And now we're going to work a little bit more on the handle parts, which shouldn't take long because they're quite basic. At the moment, we've got bronze worn on that. I'm not sure if that's the best option for this. It kind of lacks a little bit of contrast. I'm just curious to see what that would look like if we tried a different metal. Should we try a smart material? Let's download that one. That was quick because it was procedural. Let's actually try this because it looks as though it has some dirt inside the crevices there and everything. So let's try that as a smart material and see how that looks. Let's drag that above the bronze. Anyway, let's open this up and click on here you've got one called spots, which is a map, obviously. Silver aged, let's click on there, sorry. Got the albedo. Let's open up the silver aged. That's using an occlusion layer. So let's just zoom in here and see what happens if we play around with some of these values here. The intensity is at 2.8 and it's also inverted. Let's turn this down. Oh, that's quite nice. Right, and it's showing through underneath this brown map there. So it's the occlusion layer, wasn't it? Yeah, there we go. So, you know what? I don't actually mind that. It's got a nice contrast with the handle. And it's different enough to the blade to stand out as well. So I might just go for that, but I might also add a little bit more tweaking to this. And let's have a look at the intensity again. That completely blows out the brown one. We don't see it underneath. Well, obviously the other way we see the brown. So somewhere around here. So keep an eye on the parts, which will be, oops. Presumably these parts are here, like this. Not those strips, that's the holes in the... So it'll be these parts here, essentially. There you go. that one there, and this one. That will do. Okay, let's have a look at this contrast. Yeah, that's nice because you have these crevices, as I said. As you can see from the thumbnail on the smart material. Let's bring that right up. So that's looking really nice. I do like that. I have to be honest, I do like that a lot. And obviously that's going to be the same here, which is lovely. And if we click on this part here, we have no options for that, but we do have options for the underlying texture, of course, which I think I'm happy with, to be honest. I think that's pretty good. So I'm going to call that one done. I want to try and add some dirt in the crevices a bit more. So that perhaps we can find something that's a bit dark again. So dust smudges is a good one. We know that. So let's use that one again. Actually, let's put that at the top there. Like that. And there it is. And I'm going to right click on that layer now. Add a layer mask, black. Right click on the layer mask we just added and add a processor. And like before, we're going to use the dirt or the curvature. Let's use the curvature. Immediately that's made a difference. You can see there, and you can see here actually, this network of cellular looking indentations, and there it is there on the curve, just at the back there. Yeah, that's really nice. Really liking that. Why didn't I do this in the first place for the blade? Don't ask me, I'm just learning. Intensity is set to 1. You can see the effect that's having there. Obviously that's not the right intensity. Let's put that back to 1. And it's a much more subtle effect, and you can increase the contrast. But it does get a little bit bitty, as in a bit like that really. So, but we can also turn down the intensity on the edges, like that. So this is not perfect. Don't judge me because it's the first time I'm using Marmoset Toolbag, other than testing it when I bought it. But I'm really enjoying it. And I think the more you use something like this, as with anything, the more your confidence grows. So, you know, the fact that I like this probably more than I do the blade at the moment, but that's okay. I've learned something. So I'm going to go with that. I'm very tempted to do something with the handle because I still feel like it's a little bit too plain. It's missing something, and I'm not too sure what that is. Maybe it's because it hasn't got some of this that would have splattered onto that. Don't know. If you want to export this, you obviously need to export this now and put it into perhaps your game engine or back into Blender or some other software where you can, apply the texture maps that we've just created essentially, but we haven't actually saved them. If I switch back to my Windows Explorer here, I can just bring it up from the other screen. You can see we still have our baked maps, which are the ones that we generated when we baked the model initially, but we don't have any exported maps that would actually albedo, metalness, roughness, and so on. Now if we go back to setup and click on the bake, or the texture project I should say, let's just bring that up. And we scroll down a little bit here, you can see we have export settings. So if I expand that, it should be expanded. You can see it's trying to export it at this default location. And here's the resolution of those texture maps at 4K. So you can click export all, and that will then output them all to hard drive. So if I was to click here, of course, I can select the folder that I'm currently working in. Let's create a new folder here. And I'm going to call that exports. Select that folder and save. Oh no, give it a name. Okay. Well, firstly, let's change the file format to PNG. If I can see it, there it is. And let's call these hand blade. Leave it like that. just hand blade and save. And let's click on export all and see what happens. So there we are. There's our exports folder just created. Here's our albedo, ambient occlusion, metalness, normal map, and roughness map. So for now, I'm going to say thank you so much for watching, and I hope you appreciate it. And if you like my content, please do give it a thumbs up. Consider subscribing, because it really does help me out. And if you really like my stuff, then why not head over to Blender Market and buy my add-on, BB Toolkit Pro. That's the best way to support the channel and all the hard work that I put into it. Right, enough of my rambling. Have a great one, guys. I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.